The Benin-Akure War of 1818 was a pivotal conflict in the pre-colonial history of what is now Nigeria. It was not a mere skirmish, but a calculated military campaign born from a challenge to the political and spiritual authority of the Benin Empire, one of the most powerful states in West Africa. This is the story of that war. In the year of our Lord 1818, during the long Paraceous dry season, when the Harmattan winds had relinquished their hold and the sun reigned with a brutal, unimpeded intensity, a deliberate affront was delivered to the court of the Oba of Benin. The new Oba, Osenwede, heir to a dynasty that traced its lineage to the golden age of Oba of Benin the Great, was in the process of consolidating his power. It was a vulnerable period for any monarch, a time when tributary chiefs and subject kingdoms would watch closely, like crocodiles observing a riverbank, for any sign of weakness. The envoy from Akure arrived not with the humble deference of a vassal, but with the cautious arrogance of an emissary testing boundaries. The Deji of Akure, emboldened by distance and perhaps by whispered counsel from internal rivals to the new Oba, had chosen this moment to redefine his relationship with the empire. The tribute presented was an orchestrated insult: a few baskets of yams, visibly smaller and fewer than the customary amount, a handful of kola nuts, and a single aged slave whose frail body spoke of a life already spent. There was no presentation of the symbolic royal cloth, no offering of ivory or coral beads, none of the fine bronze work that acknowledged Benin's cultural and artistic supremacy. The silence in the Uga, the royal courtyard, was profound. The high chiefs, the Uzama, stood as still as the carved wooden pillars that supported the palace veranda. The air, usually fragrant with the scent of iwu and the smoke of sacred fires, grew heavy with tension. Oba Osenwede, a young man whose face was schooled in the royal mask of imperturbability, regarded the meager offering. His eyes, dark and intelligent, betrayed nothing, but the muscles along his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He accepted the tribute with a silent, regal nod, a gesture that was itself a form of condemnation. The audience was terminated without ceremony. The message had been sent, and the response, though unspoken, was already taking shape in the Oba's mind. That night, the Oba did not retire to his private quarters. Instead, he summoned his inner war council to a chamber deep within the labyrinthine palace, a room whose walls were hung with tapestries depicting the great military victories of his ancestors. The light came from a single large clay lamp, its flickering flames casting dancing shadows upon the stern faces of the Ayase, the Ezomo, the Ologbosere, and the Erebo. "My fathers," Oba Osenwede began, discarding formality. "The Deji of Akure has fed us stones and called it yam. He believes the new leopard does not know how to hunt. He forgets that the forest itself teaches the leopard." The Iyase, the premier and senior-most military chief, was the first to speak. His voice was the sound of grinding stones. "This is not merely about tribute, Alayelua. This is a spark. If we do not stamp it out, others will see it. The Ijeke, the Uromi, the Mahin, and soon the entire empire will be ablaze with insolence. Akure must be made an example. The python does not warn, it squeezes." The Ezomo, the field marshal of the Benin army, a man whose broad shoulders and scarred visage spoke of a lifetime of combat, leaned forward, the beads on his ceremonial sword clinking softly. "The dry season is our ally. The rivers are low, the paths are hard. My scouts report that Akure is fortifying its walls, but their confidence is the confidence of the antelope that has not yet seen the leopard. They prepare for a raid, not a war. We will give them a war." The planning was meticulous, a testament to Benin's sophisticated military organization. The Ezomo detailed the route. They would not take the most direct path, but a series of older, less watched hunters' trails, allowing them to approach Akure from the dense forests to the northeast, where their arrival would be least expected. The Ologbosere, a master of strategy, spoke of supply lines, of porters carrying dried fish, gari, and palm oil to sustain the army, and of foragers who would supplement their diet. The Aribo, responsible for logistics, calculated the number of arrows, the replacement shafts for spears, the reserves of shields made of elephant hide. For 7 days and 7 nights, the war drum, the ukuse, boomed its somber, resonant call across the city-state. The sound was a pulse that shifted the very lifeblood of Benin. In the blacksmith's quarter, the Iganaranwan, the forges glowed day and night. The rhythmic clang of hammers on hot iron was a new, industrial heartbeat. Master smiths, their bodies sheened in sweat, crafted not the benign tools of agriculture, but weapons of terrible beauty and efficiency. The long, leaf-shaped ebon swords for ceremonial display, the shorter, brutally practical ada for close-quarter stabbing, and the heavy, barbed spears designed to tear cruelly upon withdrawal. The Oba performed the necessary rituals at the altars of his ancestors, seeking the blessing of Oba Eware and the war god, Olokun. The priests divined the outcome, reading the patterns of cowrie shells and the entrails of a sacrificed ram. The omens, they declared, were favorable. The gods and ancestors would march with the army. The Benin army that assembled at the city's edge was a sight to instill both awe and terror. It was not a horde, but a disciplined, organized force, structured around its noble commanders. The Azomo and Iyase rode at the front, their regalia resplendent. Behind them came the regiments, each with its own distinctive insignia and battle cries. The warriors were a terrifying vision. Their bodies were smeared with white chalk and red ochre, creating grotesque patterns meant to confuse and frighten the enemy. They wore leopard teeth necklaces and amulets containing potent juju to turn aside enemy blades. Some wore helmets crafted from gourds or woven basketry, adorned with animal horns and feathers. They moved not with the chaotic noise of a mob, but with the purposeful, grim silence of a force that knew its own power. The only sounds were the rhythmic tramp of thousands of feet, the clatter of weapons, the occasional snort of a war horse, and the sharp commands of the unit leaders. The scouts, the true unsung heroes of the campaign, moved like ghosts far ahead of the main column. They were hunters and trackers, men who could read a broken twig or a displaced stone as if it were a written message. They located water sources, identified ambush points, and captured lone Akure sentries, extracting vital information before silencing them forever. As the army penetrated deeper into the forests separating Benin from Akure, the ecosystem itself seemed to recoil. Birds fell silent at their approach, and game fled before them. The sheer scale of the human procession left a scar upon the land, a wide path of trampled undergrowth and churned earth. At night, the camp was a city of fireflies, each cooking fire a pinprick of light in the immense darkness of the wilderness. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, roasted plantains, and the pungent aroma of men who had marched for days. The first the people of Akure knew of the true scale of their peril was not from their own scouts, few of whom returned, but from the change in the very atmosphere. A great, silent cloud of birds rose from the northeastern forest, disturbed by the advancing host. Then, the smoke from countless cooking fires appeared on the horizon, a permanent stain against the blue sky. The Azomo established his command post on a wooded hill overlooking the town. Akure was a formidable target, protected by tall walls of packed earth and timber, but the confidence of its defenders began to ebb as they saw the scale of the force arrayed against them. This was no punitive raid. It was an army of conquest. The siege began with textbook efficiency. The Benin army encircled the town, cutting it off from the outside world. Parties were sent to divert the streams that supplied Akure with water. Famine and thirst became the silent allies of Benin. The initial Akure sorties were brave but costly. Groups of their warriors would burst from the gates, shouting their war cries, only to be met by the unyielding, shield-walled formations of the Benin infantry. The Azomo's strategy was one of attrition. He would offer battle only on his terms, bleeding Akure's fighting strength slowly but surely. The defining moment of the siege came during a night attack. A contingent of Benin's elite warriors, their bodies blackened with charcoal, moved like shadows up to the base of the main wall. Using ropes and grappling hooks, they scaled the palisade under the cover of a moonless sky. The alarm was raised too late. The sound of clashing metal and screams erupted from within the walls as the infiltrators fought to open the main gate from the inside. Though they were eventually overwhelmed and slain to a man, they had shattered the illusion of security within Akure. The walls were no longer impregnable. Inside, conditions deteriorated rapidly. The air grew foul with the stench of death and decay. Food stores were depleted, and the water ration was a few mouthfuls a day. The Deji's council was fractured between those who advocated for a final, suicidal charge to break the siege and those who saw surrender as the only path to survival for their people. The wails of hungry children and the despairing prayers of the elders became the soundtrack of a dying city. The surrender was a somber, ritualistic affair. The gates of Akure creaked open. The Deji, stripped of his royal finery and clad in simple white cloth, emerged, followed by his high chiefs. They walked slowly, their eyes fixed on the ground, towards the pavilion where the Azomo sat in state. The victorious Benin warriors lined the path, their faces stern, their weapons held ready, a silent, terrifying honor guard. The terms of surrender were dictated, not negotiated. The terms of tribute Akure was to pay an annual tribute triple the previous amount, to include yams, livestock, cloth, and a significant number of slaves, both male and female. The terms of political submission. The Deji was to formally renounce any claim to independence and acknowledge the Oba of Benin as his overlord, a relationship to be reaffirmed with symbolic gifts at every festival. The terms of hostages. The sons of the Deji and his highest chiefs were to be taken to Benin City to be raised and educated in the Oba's court, serving as both guarantors of future loyalty and indoctrinated into Benin's culture. The terms of the instigators. The chiefs who had counseled defiance were to be surrendered for judgment in Benin. The return march to Benin City was a stark contrast to the outward journey. The army now moved with the slow, heavy pace of men laden with spoils and prisoners. They were victorious, but the cost was etched on their faces and in the limping gait of the wounded. When they finally approached the capital, they were met by jubilant crowds. The air rang with cheers, the blare of ivory trumpets, and the thunder of royal salutes. Oba Osenwede received the Azomo and the Iyase in a grand public ceremony. He praised their courage and the army's discipline. The captured standards of Akure were displayed, and the surrendered chiefs were paraded in chains. The Oba's power was now unassailable. The new Leopard had not only hunted, it had devoured its challenger. The Benin-Akure War of 1818 was a complete and total victory for the Benin Empire. It reasserted Benin's hegemony over its tributary states and demonstrated the terrifying efficiency of its military machine. For Benin, it was a story of reaffirmed glory, a tale to be cast in bronze and recited by griots for generations. For Akure, it was a national trauma. The city was left broken, impoverished, and humiliated. A generation of its young men were gone, its pride shattered, and its autonomy severely curtailed. The memory of the siege, of the starvation, and the sight of Benin warriors on their walls became a deep cultural scar, a bitter harvest sown from the seeds of defiance. The war proved that the power of the Oba of Benin, when challenged, would be enforced not just with political will, but with the disciplined might of the leopard's claws. The season of iron rain had passed, but the land would forever remember its taste. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share as this helps us grow. I will see you in the next video.